Hi everyone, welcome to our final Thursday tips and tricks for the year 2020. Today, what I'm going to talk about is one of the final steps that we do with all of our quilts, and that's adding a sleeve to the back of your quilt to enable you to hang it either in your home or at a show. So let's go ahead and get started. Usually what I do is I make the sleeve from the same fabric as the fabric that I use for the backing. But I did hear something the other day. A friend of mine told me that what she does when she makes her sleeves is to make her sleeve out of the fabrics that she used in the front of the quilt. And that way, if there's ever any damage to the quilt that's in the front, they can simply take the sleeve off the back and use that fabric to make repairs. I thought that made a lot of sense. I think from now on, I'm going to try to start doing that with some of my quilts. But for this, you're going to see fabric that matches the backing. So basically, to make a sleeve, you're going to need to cut your fabric about 9 to 10 inches wide. Most quilt shows, if you decide to hang a quilt in a quilt show, require that your sleeve be at least 4 inches. So 9 or 10 inches is going to give you a little extra wiggle room there. The length of your sleeve should be, a little less than the actual width of your quilt. Generally speaking, I kind of cut my sleeve length from about the inside of the binding to the inside of the binding. And that's going to give me just a little bit of wiggle room there so that when I fold in the two edges, and I do a double fold on the edges, and I secure it with stitching so that it's a nice finished edge. But that way, when I go to position that onto the back of the project, the sleeve is going to be in about a ½ an inch from either of the sides. I don't want to ever have that sleeve hanging out beyond the edges of the quilt. Once the sleeve is made, what I do is I pin it securely with the top folded edge right up against the binding and then the bottom edge. And if you pin in the direction you're going to sew, you're not going to be putting any pins into your fingers. But when you go to stitch, you're going to stitch it on with hand stitching. Some people will actually put the binding on put the sleeve on at the same time as the binding, but that tends to make a really hefty binding that I don't like. So I hand stitch both edges. Be sneaky with your threads. You want to, when you do your hand stitching, move the needle between the layers of the quilt. Don't let any of those threads peek through to the front of your project. And one of the other things that I do is I always anchor down this bottom edge so that it makes sliding a rod through nice and easy. And this is a simple sleeve, and this works really well, especially if the rod that you're using to hang is a nice flat rod. What happens with a simple sleeve, if your rod is flat and you proceed to hang it, your quilt will hang nice and flat. But there's something that's going to happen if you put your quilt in a show. Most shows are using rods that are about this wide. They're a little bit hefty. And if you put on just a simple sleeve and you put in a substantial rod, what happens is the top of the quilt kind of rolls up and rolls back toward me. And the front has a little bit of a bubble on it. And that's just the nature of the beast. It's nothing that you did wrong, but it's something that judges will notice. So if you're putting a project in for judging, you're going to want to take a minute or two and create what we call a pleated sleeve. And that's going to give you a little bit of wiggle room so that your quilt will hang nice and flat. So let me talk to you about doing that. You'll start again with about a 10-inch wide. You'll take and you'll do your stitching together. You'll finish up the edges. And then what you're going to do with the seam being right here, fold along the seam and find a halfway mark. So I do this at the ironing board. So my seam is here and I put a pretty significant press in this side. And then from that folded edge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a basting stitch. And I did this with black thread so you can see it. And I'm going to do a basting stitch about a ½ an inch from the fold. So that when I go to open this up and fold it to position on my quilt like this, this side of the sleeve is going to have a little looseness to it. And what that's going to do, that looseness, now that looseness will happen after all the hand stitching is done and you've removed the stitching from that pleat, but your sleeve will have a little looseness in this one area. So it's flat on the bottom and loosey-goosey at the top, so that when you slide a substantial rod through your sleeve, the looseness is fitted on the back of the sleeve and the front hangs nice and flat. Trust me, if you're going for a ribbon or you're going for some prize money, judges will give you extra bonus points if you do this kind of sleeve in your project. So there you have it, a great batch of information for the year 2020. Don't forget about our Christmas Everlasting projects that are free on our website, on our downloads page. And if you don't have time to make a Christmas Everlasting quilt, of course, you're seeing it there in red and green, but remember, you can also change it to wintry colors so you can keep the wall hanging in your house up a little bit longer. But also remember about the ornaments, and don't forget to take some time and follow through with the Christmas Everlasting project and enjoy the book that it was made for. Marie Bostwick is a friend of mine. Her second sister book in 2018 was made into a Hallmark Hall of Fame movie, and to celebrate that, I designed the Christmas Everlasting quilt to go along with the Christmas Everlasting movie. So have a great holiday season, have a safe and happy new year, and I'll see you again in January of 2021.